If you stroll or saunter and will walk, jump, hop, or run, the prudent shoe for you to choose is price and sun.
You might think beauty comes in spring and sparrow, or when the sunrise hits the morning dew. But if you walk the straight and narrow, you'll find the elegance and comfort is up. Do you know what the most beautiful thing in the world is, Charlie?
A shoe?
A shoe.
Did you know the most beautiful thing in the world is a shoe? I need to tell Kelly, she doesn't believe me, that shoes are vitally important. Friends, the story of our musical this morning. In 1993, Steve Pateman had risen through the ranks of W.J. Brooks' factory in Northamptonshire, which I'm sure has a much more British-sounding pronunciation. He was a fourth-generation shoemaker, but at the time, the market for baroques, they look like Oxfords, they're not, they're fancier. Was in the decline. Steve cut the workforce from 70 to 21, and they were still facing closing the factory. It was then that Steve got a call from a shop that specialized in sales to drag queens, men who dress as women for performance, and asked if they could make boots or shoes that were made for full-size men who wanted to wear stiletto heels. And for some years, the factory was saved. This is the true story of Kinky Boots. When it did close, it was absolutely for what you expected to close for. There were cheaper knockoffs somewhere. And it made the expensive, fancy ones he made seem obsolete and excessive. But while the store closed, the story and legacy continued. In 2005, Kinky Boots was made into a movie and was released. The story, with its visuals and its ideas, was primed to be a musical. Director Jerry Mitchell called star of stage and screen, Harvey Fierstein, not the other one, who called the legend Cyndi Lauper. And the musical Kinky Boots began. The show opened in 2012 in Chicago and moved to Broadway in 2013, fighting its way against Matilda, so no one thought it would win anything. It won several things, including Best Score for Cyndi Lauper, the first time a woman writing on her own won that award. Kinky Boots' story is similar to the story of Steve's, just with a lot more drama and songs. Charlie Price is raised to believe and work in the future and that he would take over the business of Price and Sons. By the end of the very first song, Charlie is grown and he has no interest in taking over the family business. He doesn't even want to stay in town. He decides to move to London with his fiancée and start a new life in London. And as soon as he does that, his father dies, leaving Charlie in charge of Price and Sons. All of its unsold shoes, the staff who were almost like family, and debt. And while selling the overstock shoes in London, Charlie is saved from a mugging by Lola, a drag performer who breaks her high heel boot in the process. And somewhere in the midst of all of this, Charlie has a revelation that he could save his company and the jobs of the folks he grew up with if he makes women's shoes for women who are actually men. Of course, relationships are made. Oh no, that's not done. Charlie needs some growth. This was this first attempt at a shoe for drag queens. It's not great. I mean, it's fine. It's not, every version has this kind of image. Anyway, Relationships are made and developed and grown. Assumptions are challenged. There's a boxing match between Lola and one of the very manly, too manly to treat Lola like a real person in the middle of the show that Lola throws because she had been trained as a boxer by her when she was a young boy. It's a little confusing. I don't think Kinky Boots does the appropriate version of what drag looks like because Lola spends all of her time in drag. It's a little more as a person who is transgender, but the world's imperfect. Still, a connection is made between the folks when characters are willing to be honest, to talk about their childhood, their fathers, their expectations their fathers had of them, to accept themselves and their calling and each other. Our first song from the show, our next song, is about the relationship between Charlie and Lola when they realize they are not actually that different from each other. They both lived in the shadow of their fathers and not being able to be their true selves, or living into who they really were, who was not at all who their father thought they would be. You will find on your table some coloring pages. It's our activity for the day. You're welcome to color throughout the service today.
Romans 8:12-17. So then, brothers and sisters, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is that very Spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. If in fact we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. 1 John 3:1-3. See what love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are. The reason the world does not know us is that it did not know him. Beloved, we are God's children now. What we will be has not yet been revealed. What we do know is this: when he is revealed, we will be like him, for we will see him as he is. And all who have this hope in him purify themselves, just as he is pure.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving, and God who is love, bless our words and our thoughts and our reflections always as we learn and prepare and become. Amen. In the house on the Cerulean Sea, in the house on the Cerulean Sea, beneath lights, there we go. A quiet man living a droll life. He's also British, by the way. And an underpaid and underappreciated job of making sure the orphanage that is filled with misfit magical kids and their committed and unusual caretaker, Arthur, are following the rules, are doing the things that the orphanage higher-ups demand that they do. Over the course of the month that Linus was there, he grows protective and affectionate toward the children and Arthur. In the course of the story, Linus finds a community that he will return to, a family, a place that he belongs. See, one of the things in the early church that the early church did, at least according to the stories, was divide families. Jesus talked about it too. These are stories that are passed down, at least the ones we have, about Paul and women. But we're talking about Paul, so it's not at all sexual. In fact, that is kind of the problem. There were women who were read what's there. There were marriages arranged for young women by their fathers, and it turns out they were not interested at all. This is Thecla. There's a whole secondary book called The Acts of Paul and Thecla. Many of these young women, then, they found meaning in what Paul was preaching, in the life, the story, the resurrection of Jesus, and they would run away. They would run away from their families into a community that they were being called to. I mean, it's also the same thing Jesus did. The first thing Jesus did was he gathered this community of men and women. Some were older and some were young and married and older and unattached and vice versa. Any combination were built into this new community. Did I say women? There were women there. Don't forget them. And what will become the church, what grows into the church, is this radical, diverse community of human messiness. Of all ages, all statuses, all income, all capabilities, all genders, all people, all equal, all in a place, and all belonging. All family, doing what families do together, learning and struggling and growing and doing all of life together every day. Something incredibly special was happening in this new church. These families, this chosen family, were being formed, united by the Spirit under the God who calls us beloved children and adopts every one of us. And have you ever really thought about that? Have you ever really thought how amazing it is to be called a child of God, chosen by God, adopted alongside Christ, part of God's family, gathered around the dinner table, part of God's inheritance of love? Have you ever really considered what that means to you? You, just as you are beloved. And so is your neighbor, and so is every stranger. And before we leave this moment, I wonder if we could just settle in a moment of amazement of being a beloved child of God. And it can be overwhelming, and sometimes it's too much, and sometimes it's unbelievable. But for a moment, if you need to close your eyes, take a breath, imagine just for a moment, what if it's true? Just for a moment, imagine or pretend you believe it, even if you don't on your day-to-day. Imagine, pretend what it would be like to know you are loved by God, the creator of the universe. And take a breath. And maybe we do that every day until it stops being something we have to pretend or imagine, and until it's something that we are, or we believe we are. Because if you are a child of God, and your neighbor is a beloved child of God, and if we are all adopted into the inheritance of God's love and the family of God, we are all family then. You and you and you and me. and our neighbor over yonder, and the farmer who works the field out back, and that person in your life who annoys you, and that aggressive driver who passed you too quickly, and the immigrant and the political leader and the gay couple and the drag queen. We are all siblings, we are one family, learning together and growing, struggling, and doing life together, hopefully every day. Every day. Just as each one of us is, and knowing it's loved, and knowing through love, through the love of God and the love of community, that we will be changed. Because I think that's the story and the good news of Kinky, that we can find family and community just as we are. But Charlie and Lola were changed, not in the change that Lola stops being a drag queen or living as her full self, but maybe she does find some healing from her past relationship with her dad through her friendship with Charlie. And Charlie is changed by being loved and by loving others and by loving and accepting himself more and more until that love changes everything around him, until all are welcomed and all are loved and all belong and all are family. In finding the common ground together, that community of Pearson sons begin to accept each other and love each other just as they are. They are changed, and love grew. And that's here. Everyone you meet and everyone you don't. Every queer kid rejected by their church or their family, and every gay person who made it to an old age. Every shoemaker and firefighter and teacher and nurse and patient and Republican and Democrat and socialist and anarchist. Every religion and those who are not religious, and every is beloved child of God. Everyone belongs. Everyone is family. Everyone is beloved. And you belong, and we belong. And I think it is the church's call. I think it is the call of this church family to let everyone know that they belong. They belong here. They belong here in church. They belong here in this community. They belong here in our hearts, in our love with each other. They belong here in this world. They belong here just as they are. And so, for a few minutes, I invite you to discuss at your table. If you want to mix up a little bit, if you want to combine, that's okay. I'm looking at you, front row. I wonder if you've reflected on how the love of God feels to you. That might be, there's just 3 questions. There are 2 sections, 2 sets of questions. Have you ever felt like you've belonged somewhere? Maybe here. What was that feeling of belonging like? And how might we help others feel that they belong? Maybe when they're here, maybe when we meet them in the world. I invite you to discuss.